I never thought a single kiss could shatter my entire world. But that's exactly what happened on that fateful night in June, when a momentary lapse in judgment sent my life spiraling into chaos. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. My husband Jake and I were hosting a pre-party at our place before heading out to the grand opening of his best friend, Mark's new bar downtown. The living room buzzed with the chatter of our closest friends, the air thick with Jake's famous barbecue and the sweet time in margaritas. I'd spent hours getting ready, slipping into a slinky red dress that hugged my curves in all the right places. As I sashayed around the room, topping off drinks and laughing at bad jokes, I couldn't help but notice Jake's eyes following me. 10 years of marriage, and he still looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. But something felt off. Maybe it was the third margarita cloud in my judgment, or the suffocating summer heat making me restless. Whatever it was, a dangerous idea started to take root in my mind. Jake had always been the jealous type, quick to bristle at any man who dared to look at me sideways. It was cute in a caveman sort of way. But lately, that spark of possessiveness seemed to have fizzled out. He'd grown complacent, comfortable in our routines. I found myself craving that fire, that passion that used to make me feel so desired. So when Mark arrived, fashionably late and looking annoyingly handsome in a crisp white shirt, a wicked plan formed in my tequila-soaked brain. I'd give Jake a little show, remind him of what he had. Nothing serious, just a harmless flirtation to get his blood pumping. As the party wound down and we prepared to head out, I made my move. Jake was busy in the kitchen, scraping the grill clean. I sidled up to Mark, who was checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. "Hey, stud," I purred, leaning in close. "Ready for your big night?" Mark turned, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise at my proximity. "Oh yes, Sarah. Can't wait." I giggled, swaying slightly on my feet. "Well, I think this calls for a good luck kiss, don't you?" Before he could respond, I pressed my lips to his. It was meant to be quick, playful, the kind of meaningless peck you'd give your brother-in-law at Christmas. But something shifted in that fraction of a second. Maybe it was the way Mark's hand instinctively went to my waist, setting me. Maybe it was the faint trace of his cologne, spicy and unfamiliar. Whatever it was, I found myself deepening the kiss, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. For one dizzying moment the world fell away. And then, like a bucket of ice water, I heard the sound of shattering glass behind me. I whirled around to see Jake standing in the doorway, a broken bottle of wine at his feet, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "Jake," I gasped, my stomach plummeting. "It's not. I was just..." But the words died in my throat as I watched the emotions play across his face. Confusion gave way to hurt, then anger, then something worse, a cold, empty blankness that chilled me to my core. Without a word, he turned and walked out the front door. "Jake," I called after him, my voice shrill with panic. But he was already gone, leaving nothing but the acrid smell of burnt meat and the echo of my own stupidity. The room had gone deathly quiet. I turned to see our friends staring at me, a mix of shock and judgment in their eyes. Mark looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "I am sorry," he mumbled, not meeting my gaze. "I should go." One by one, our guests filed out, muttering awkward goodbyes. In a matter of minutes, I found myself alone in our suddenly too big house, the silence pressing in on me like a physical weight. I sat to the floor, my back against the wall, and buried my face in my hands. What had I done? How could I have been so monumentally stupid? It was supposed to be a joke, a silly game to spark a reaction. Instead, I lit a match and tossed it onto the carefully constructed life we'd built together. As the hours ticked by and Jake didn't return, the full magnitude of my actions began to sink in. This wasn't just a fight we could smooth over with apologies and make up sex. I'd crossed a line, violated the trust that was the foundation of our marriage. I tried calling Jake's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. I left message after message, my voice growing more frantic with each one. "Jake, please, I'm so sorry. It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was just a stupid mistake. Please come home so we can talk about this." But the house remained silent, save for the occasional pinging of my phone as concerned messages from friends trickled in. "Has anyone seen Jake? Was he okay? As dawn broke, casting a sickly gray light through the windows, I was still sitting on the floor, my mascara streaking down my cheeks, my throat rolled from crying. The magnitude of what I'd crashed over me in waves, each one threatening to pull me under. I'd always prided myself on being a good wife. Sure, Jake and I had our problems. What couple didn't? But at the end of the day, I thought we were solid, unshakable. Now, with one monumentally stupid decision, I'd put cracks in our foundation that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. The sound of a key in the lock jolted me from my spiral of self-loathing. I scrambled to my feet, hope surging in my chest. But it wasn't Jake who walked through the door. It was his sister, Emmy. Of sorrow, she sighed, taking in my disheveled appearance. What have you done? I opened my mouth to explain, to defend myself, but all that came out was a choked sob. Emmy's arms were around me in an instant, and I clung to her like a lifeline. He called me last night. Emmy said softly, stroking my hair. He's staying at my place for now. He needs some time to process things. Is he okay? I managed to croak out. Emmy pulled back, her eyes full of sympathy and something else. Disappointment, maybe. Physically, yes. Emotionally. I've never seen him like this, Sarah. He's broken. The word hit me like a physical blow. Broken. I'd broken my husband, the man I love more than anything in this world. I need to see him, I said, already moving towards the door. I need to explain, to fix this somehow. Emmy's hand on my arm stopped me. That's not a good idea right now. He doesn't want to see you, Sarah. He needs space. Space, the word echoed in my head, mocking me. How much space? How long until I could start putting the pieces of our life back together? As if reading my mind, Emmy squeezed my arm gently. I don't know how this is going to play out, Sarah. But I do know my brother. He loves you, but right now he doesn't like you very much. And he's not sure he can trust you. I nodded numbly, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. What do I do now? I whispered. Emmy sighed, guiding me to the couch. For now, you wait and you do some serious soul-searching about why you did what you did. Because when Jake is ready to talk, if he's ready to talk, it ain't a need to have some answers. As Emmy bustled around the kitchen, making coffee and cleaning up the remnants of last night's disaster, I sat on the couch, staring at nothing. The weight of my actions pressed down on me, threatening to crush me entirely. I'd always thought of myself as a good person, a faithful wife. But in one moment of drunken stupidity, I'd become the villain in my own love story. And I had no idea how to make it right. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a journey that would test the limits of love, trust, and forgiveness. A journey that would force me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself and my marriage. A journey that would either break us apart forever, or forge us into something stronger than we'd ever been before. But in that moment, curled up on the couch in my wrinkled party dress, all I could do was pray that somehow, someway, I hadn't irreparably destroyed the best thing in my life. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and tear-stained pillows. I moved through our house like a ghost, touching Jake's things, breathing in his scent from the clothes he'd left behind. Every ring of the phone sent my heart racing, only for it to plummet when it wasn't his voice on the other end. Our friends tiptoed around me, their attempts at comfort feeling hollow and insufficient. How could they understand the gaping hole in my chest, the constant ache of regret that threatened to swallow me whole? He'll come around, they'd say, their voices dripping with forced optimism. Jake loves you, he just needs time. But as the days turned into a week and two, I began to wonder if love was enough to overcome what I'd done. I threw myself into cleaning the house, as if I could somehow scrub away my mistakes along with the dust and grime. I rearranged furniture, donated old clothes, anything to keep my hands and mind occupied. But no matter how exhausted I made myself, sleep remained elusive. When I did manage to drift off, my dreams were plagued by that moment. The look in Jake's eyes when he saw me kissing Mark. I'd wake up gasping, reaching for him across the empty expanse of our bed. Work became my refuge, the only place where I could pretend things were normal for a few hours. I threw myself into projects, staying late at the office, just to avoid going home to an empty house. My coworkers noticed the change, of course. The bags under my eyes, the way my clothes hung a little looser each day. Everything okay, Sarah? My boss, Linda, asked one afternoon, concern etched on her face. You've seemed off lately. I plastered on a smile that felt more like a grimace. Just a little stressed, nothing to worry about. But as I turned to leave her office, Linda's voice stopped me. Sarah, wait. Whatever's going on, you know you can talk to me, right? Not as your boss, but as a friend. Something in her tone, the genuine worry in her eyes, made the walls I'd carefully constructed start to crumble. Before I knew it, I was collapsing into the chair across from her desk, spilling out the whole sordid story between heaving sobs. To her credit, Linda didn't judge. She listened, offering tissues and gentle words of support. When I'd finally cried myself out, she leaned forward, her eyes serious. Sarah, honey, you made a mistake. A big one, yes, but it doesn't have to be the end of your marriage. But you need to take care of yourself. You look like you haven't eaten or slept properly in weeks. I shrugged, too drained to argue, then decided and stood up decisively. Take the rest of the day off. Go home. Take a long bath and get some sleep. Doctor's orders. I wanted to protest, but the thought of facing another afternoon of pretending to be okay suddenly seemed impossible. I nodded weakly and gathered my things. As I drove home, Linda's words echoed in my head. A mistake. That's all it was, right? A stupid, drunken mistake. But why had I done it? The question had been gnawing at me for weeks, but I'd been too afraid to really examine it. I told myself it was just a joke, a ploy for attention. But as I soaked in the tub that evening, letting the hot water soothe my aching muscles, I forced myself to dig deeper. The truth was, things hadn't been perfect between Jake and me for a while. We'd fallen into a routine, comfortable but lacking the spark that had drawn us together in the first place. I'd felt taken for granted, invisible almost. But instead of talking to Jake about it like an adult, I'd acted out in the worst possible way. I'd hurt the person I loved most in the world, all because I was too scared to admit I was feeling insecure. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I sank lower in the water, letting it cover my face as I screamed silently into the bubbles. How could I have been so selfish, so thoughtless? As I dried off and slipped into one of Jake's old t-shirts, I made a decision. I couldn't change what I'd done, but I could start taking steps to fix it, to fix myself. The next morning I called a therapist. It was time to face my issues head-on, to figure out why I'd sabotaged my own happiness, and maybe, just maybe, become the kind of person Jake could trust again. Days turned into weeks, and still Jake remained distant. The only updates I got were through Emmy, who assured me he was okay, but still processing everything. Each day without him felt like an eternity, but I forced myself to respect his need for space. Instead, I focused on my therapy sessions, digging into the insecurities and fears that had led me to that fateful moment. It wasn't easy. There were days when I left Dr. Rosen's office feeling raw and exposed, like I peeled back layers of myself I didn't even know existed. But slowly, painfully, I started to understand myself better. The need for validation that stemmed from my parents' divorce. The fear of abandonment that made me push people away before they could leave me. The way I used humor and flirtation as a shield against real intimacy. It wasn't pretty facing these truths about myself. But with each session I felt a little stronger, a little more in control of my own actions and emotions. One evening, about a month after that disastrous night, I was curled up on the couch with a book when my phone buzzed. My heart nearly stopped when I saw Jake's name on the screen. Can we meet tomorrow? Cafe on 4th, 2 p.m. My fingers shook as I typed out a response. Yes, I'll be there. Sleep was impossible that night. I tossed and turned, running through every possible scenario in my head. Would he forgive me? Ask for a divorce? The uncertainty was agonizing. When I walked into the cafe the next day, my stomach was in knots. Jake was already there, sitting at a table in the corner, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He looked tired, I noticed with a pang of guilt. There were shadows under his eyes, and his usual neatly trimmed beard had grown out a bit. Hi, I said softly, sliding into the seat across from him. Jake's eyes met mine and my breath caught in my throat. There was so much swirling in those familiar brown depths. Hurt, anger, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite place. Thanks for meeting me, he said, his voice gruff. An awkward silence fell between us. I wanted to reach out to take his hand, but I held back, unsure of where we stood. Finally, Jake spoke. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks. About us. About what happened. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He took a deep breath. What you did, it hurt me, Sarah. More than I thought anything could. I felt betrayed, humiliated. I kept replaying that moment in my head, wondering what I'd done wrong, why it wasn't enough for you. Tears sprang to my eyes. Jake, no. You didn't do anything wrong. It was all me. I was stupid and selfish and… He held up a hand, stopping me. Let me finish, please. I was angry for a long time. Part of me wanted to hurt you back, to make you feel as awful as I did. But I love you, Sarah. Despite everything, I still love you. And I don't want to throw away 10 years of marriage over one mistake. Hope bloomed in my chest, fragile but persistent. What are you saying? Jake's eyes locked with mine, serious and intense. I'm saying I want to try to work through this. But it's not going to be easy. The trust between us is broken, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again. I nodded, tears streaming down my face now. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes, Jake. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to work through my issues. I know it doesn't excuse what I did, but I want to be better. For you, for us. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. That's good. I think we both have some work to do, individually and together. He reached across the table then, taking my hand in his. The familiar warmth of his skin against mine sent a jolt through my body. I can't promise you anything, he said softly, but I want to try. I squeezed his hand, hope and gratitude and love threatening to overwhelm me. That's all I can ask for. Thank you, Jake. As we left the cafe that day, walking side by side but not quite touching, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that Jake was willing to give our marriage another chance. Fear of the long, difficult road ahead. And a steely determination to prove to him and to myself that I could be the wife he deserved. Little did I know the hardest part of our journey was yet to come. The weeks that followed our cafe meeting were a delicate dance of tentative reconciliation and lingering tension. Jake moved back into our house, but the distance between us was palpable. We slept in the same bed, but there might as well have been an ocean between us. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping that today would be the day things felt normal again. But normalcy seemed like a distant memory, a goal that kept slipping further away, the harder we'd try to grasp it. We went through the motions of rebuilding our relationship, date nights at restaurants where conversation felt forced and stilted, couples therapy sessions that left us both emotionally drained, movie nights on the couch where we sat at opposite ends, the space between us a stark reminder of what I'd done. I tried everything I could think of to show Jake how sorry I was, how committed I was to making things right. I cooked his favorite meals, left little notes for him to find, and initiated conversations about our future. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was holding back, keeping a part of himself walled off from me. One evening, about 2 months after Jake had moved back in, I decided to broach the subject. We were sitting at the dinner table, picking at a meal I'd spent hours preparing. The silence between us was deafening. Jake, I said softly, setting down my fork. Can we talk? He looked up, his expression guarded. About what? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. About us. About how things have been since you came back. I feel like we're going through the motions but not really connecting. And I miss you, I miss us. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his plate. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. What did you expect, Sarah? That everything would just go back to normal? That I'd forget if I saw that night? No, of course not, I said quickly. I know it's going to take time. I want to know if you think we're making progress. If you think there's hope for us. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, Sarah. I'm trying, I really am. But every time I look at you, I see you kissing Mark. I hear everyone at the party whispering, laughing at me behind my back. It's like this constant loop playing in my head, and I don't know how to shut it off. His words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I'm so sorry, Jake. If I could take it back, I would. You have to believe that. But you can't take it back, he said, his voice rising slightly. It happened. You made that choice. And now we both have to live with the consequences. I reached across the table trying to take his hand, but he pulled away. The rejection stung, bringing fresh tears to my eyes. What can I do? I pleaded. Tell me how to fix this, Jake. I'll do anything. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's just it, Sarah. I don't know if this can be fixed. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. And without trust, what do we have? With that, he walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the remnants of our uneaten dinner and the weight of my mistakes pressing down on me. The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. There were moments when I thought we were making progress. A shared laugh over a TV show. A brief touch as we passed each other in the hallway. But these glimpses of our old connection were always followed by periods of cold distance. I threw myself into my work, staying late at the office most nights. It was easier than going home to the tension-filled silence of our house. Jake, too, seemed to be finding reasons to be away from home more often. He started going to the gym every evening, sometimes not returning until well after I'd gone to bed. One night, unable to sleep, I had Jake's key in the locker around midnight. The familiar scent of his cologne wafted into our bedroom as he quietly undressed in the dark. But there was something else. A faint floral fragrance that definitely wasn't his. My stomach churned with anxiety. Was he seeing someone else? The thought made me feel sick, but a small traitorous voice in my head whispered that I deserved it. That this was karma for what I'd done. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers. But what right did I have? I was the one who had broken our vows first. So I lay there in the dark, listening to Jake's steady breathing beside me, feeling further away from him than ever. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between us seemed to grow exponentially. We were like two strangers sharing a living space, our interactions limited to polite small talk and discussions about household chores. The warmth and intimacy that had once defined our relationship had been replaced by a cold, formal courtesy that broke my heart a little more each day. I started to wonder if this was what the rest of our lives would look like. Two people bound together by a shared past but unable to move forward. The thought was unbearable. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Jake surprised me one evening by suggesting we go out for dinner. Let's try that new Italian place downtown, he said, a hint of his old smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It'll be good for us to get out of the house. Hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe this was a turning point. Maybe Jake was finally ready to truly forgive, to start rebuilding our relationship in earnest. I spent hours getting ready, choosing a dress I knew Jake had always loved, styling my hair the way he preferred. As we drove to the restaurant, I felt a glimmer of optimism for the first time in months. The restaurant was cozy and romantic, soft candlelight flickering on the tables. Jake was attentive, asking about my day, laughing at my jokes. It felt almost like old times, and I found myself relaxing, daring to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. After dinner, Jake suggested a walk through the nearby park. The night was warm, stars twinkling overhead. As we strolled along the path, Jake's hand found mine, our fingers intertwining. My heart soared at the contact. Sarah, Jake said, stopping and turning to face me. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. Oh, I said, my pulse quickening. Was this it, the moment I'd been hoping for, when he'd finally tell me he'd forgiven me? Jake's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify. I think I'm ready to move forward, to put the past behind us and start fresh. Tears of joy and relief sprang to my eyes. Oh, Jake, I breathed. I'm so glad. I love you so much, and I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I know you will. But first, there's something I need to show you. Confused, I let him lead me further down the path. We rounded a corner and suddenly, my world shattered for the second time in less than a year. There, on a bench illuminated by a street lamp, sat a woman. As we approached, she stood and I recognized her immediately. Jessica, Jake's colleague from work. The one whose perfume I'd smelled on him that night. Before I could process what was happening, Jake pulled Jessica into his arms and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, but a deep, passionate kiss that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. I stood there, frozen, unable to believe what I was seeing. When Jake finally pulled away from Jessica, he turned to me, his eyes cold and hard. "Now you know how it feels," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "To see the person you love most in the world betray you. To have your trust shattered in an instant." The realization of what was happening hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't forgiveness. This was revenge. "Jake." I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "How could you?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that bore no resemblance to the warm laugh I'd fallen in love with. "How could I? That's rich, coming from you. I told you I'd never be able to look at you the same way again. This is why." Jessica stood there awkwardly, looking almost as shocked as I felt. "Jake," she said softly. I thought you said you were separated." Jake ignored her, his eyes fixed on me. "I wanted you to feel what I felt that night. The humiliation. The betrayal. Now we're even." I shook my head, unable to form words through my sobs. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a nightmare. But it wasn't. This was real. This was the price of my mistake, served cold and calculated. As Jake turned to walk away, his arm around Jessica's waist, I found my voice. "So that's it," I called after him. "An eye for an eye. Where does that leave us?" He paused, looking back over his shoulder. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold hardness. "It leaves us nowhere," he said quietly. "Goodbye, sorrow." I watched them walk away, my legs giving out beneath me. I sank to the ground, my entire body shaking the sobs. In the space of a few minutes, my world had been turned upside down once again. As I sat there in the dark, empty park, the full weight of what had happened crashed over me. Jake's elaborate setup, the weeks of planning it must have taken, the deliberate cruelty of it all. It was a side of him I'd never seen before. A side I'd created with my own faultless actions. I realized then that there was no coming back from this. The trust between us, already fragile and strained, had been obliterated beyond repair. We had both crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, inflicted wounds too deep to heal. Our love story, which had once seemed so perfect, so unshakable, had devolved into a tragedy of our own making. Two people who had loved each other deeply, destroyed by mistakes, misunderstandings, and the poison of revenge. As I stumbled home that night, alone and broken, I couldn't help but think of that fateful kiss that had started it all. One moment of stupidity had set off a chain reaction that had torn apart everything I held dear. I was the bad wife who had betrayed her husband's trust. But now, Jake had become something I never thought he could be. Cruel, vindictive, capable of inflicting the same pain he had suffered. In the end, we had both lost. There would be no happily ever after, no miraculous reconciliation. Just two broken people, forever changed by the choices we had made and the trust we had shattered. As I lay in our bed that night, soon to be just my bed, I stared at the ceiling.